I'm Nora. I used to think family meant safety, meant warmth, meant knowing there was always someone behind you, someone who would catch you if you fell. But what I learned was that family can also be the blade in your back, the quiet hand emptying your pockets while smiling at you across the table. I was 25, a young architect, still naive enough to believe that hard work and talent were enough to build something lasting, something real. I had a small studio, Nora Design Studio, named after me because it was supposed to be my dream, my future, my foundation, and for a while I was waking up before sunrise, sketching into the night, hands stained with graphite, eyes red from lack of sleep but filled with purpose. I was designing cafes, lofts, public spaces with warmth, with clarity, with honesty. I believed in the work, I believed in the process, I believed in the future I was building, and I believed in the people around me, or more specifically, in one person. My older brother Khan. He was older, more experienced. He understood contracts, finance, business, all the things I thought I didn't need to worry about. He offered to help, said we'd build it together, that he'd handle the back end while I handled the design. It felt like balance, like trust, like family. And when he suggested putting the company in his name for now, just to make the paperwork easier, I said yes, because why wouldn't I? I didn't see the warning signs, the way he redirected questions in meetings, the way clients started thanking him instead of me, the way employees looked to him for answers. I told myself it was fine, that I didn't care about credit, that I only cared about the work, but deep down something had started to shift and I ignored it. I let it grow like a crack in concrete, hidden at first but inevitable. And then one day I got a call from the bank asking about a loan I never took, asking about overdue payments on accounts I didn't know existed. And I remember standing there in the middle of a construction site, phone in my hand, wind in my face, and feeling the ground tilt just slightly enough to know something was wrong, enough to feel it in my bones. And when I confronted him, when I looked him in the eyes and asked him to explain, he smiled, that same smile he always wore, and told me not to worry, said it was just a mistake, just a clerical error, just a technical issue. And I wanted so badly to believe him. I wanted to believe that he wouldn't lie, that he wouldn't steal, that he wouldn't build an empire on my back while I wasn't looking. But deep down I knew. And that night I went home and opened every file, every email, every invoice, every contract I had blindly signed. And I saw it. I saw the truth in every line, in every signature, in every missing clause. The company was his, the accounts were his, the assets were his, and I was nothing. I was a ghost in my own creation, invisible and disposable. And the worst part was that he had done it so slowly, so carefully, that I had helped him, handed him the tools, smiled while he took everything. And I didn't scream, I didn't cry. I sat there in silence and let the rage settle inside me like sediment, because I knew this wasn't something I could fix with confrontation. This wasn't something I could shout my way through. This was war, and I would not go into battle with noise. I would move like shadow, like breath, like dust. I started documenting everything. Printing, saving, photographing. I visited clients, asked questions, listened carefully, followed the trail of signatures and emails and accounts. And what I found was worse than I imagined. My name had been removed from proposals, my work repackaged under his label, Khan Architecture Group, a name I had never approved, a name I had never even heard, until I saw it on a glossy brochure handed to a client I had known since university. And I smiled, I nodded, I pretended not to notice, and I went home and wrote everything down. I started watching The Office from a distance, seeing who stayed late, who left early, who took orders from him, and who still believed in me. I realized most of them didn't care. They followed power, not truth, not loyalty, not history, and that was fine. I didn't need an army, I needed silence and time. I pulled away slowly, told them I was entering a design competition, that I needed space, that I wanted solitude, and they believed me because I had always been the quiet one, the focused one, the one who worked better alone. And while they carried on, I disappeared into a different kind of work, not sketching, not designing, but planning, because if he could take everything from me quietly, then I would take it back even quieter. I would find the cracks in his foundation, the small illegalities, the overlooked missteps, the false declarations, and when the time came, I would pull one thread and let it all fall apart, because he had taught me how to build, but more importantly, he had taught me how to watch, how to wait, how to destroy without making a sound. I started waking up before the city. I would sit by the window with a notebook and write down everything I remembered from the beginning, every conversation, every strange look, every time Khan asked me to sign something in a hurry and told me not to worry, and I didn't worry because I trusted him, because he was my brother, because he had held my hand when I broke my arm at 6 years old, and I thought that kind of memory meant something. I thought it could protect me from being used and discarded like a tool that had outlived its purpose. But now I knew better, and knowing better meant I had to move different. I created a backup of every file on every device in the office server, copies of contracts that didn't have my name on them, copies of invoices signed with someone else's signature, copies of correspondence that proved the firm's most successful designs had come from my hands. I even found emails he sent where he told clients I was just a concept artist, just a consultant, a hired hand to bring his visions to life, and I didn't feel anger anymore, just clarity, cold, clean clarity, and with that came purpose. I rented a private mailbox under a false name. I opened a separate bank account. I spoke to a friend from university who now worked in compliance and asked her hypothetical questions about fraud and misrepresentation and tax evasion, and each time she answered, I felt another piece of the puzzle click into place. I realized I didn't just want revenge, I wanted permanence. I didn't want him to know it was me. I didn't want him to see it coming. I wanted him to wake up one day and realize the ground was gone beneath him and that there was no one to blame but himself. I began drafting a new design, not for a building, not for a space, but for his collapse. I studied the firm's structure, its blind spots, its dependencies. I learned which suppliers were underpaid, which clients were dissatisfied, which permits were rushed and falsified and incomplete. I made lists, I made maps, I made silence my weapon and strategy my faith, and all the while I smiled when I saw him. I told him I was working on something big, something beautiful, something important, and he believed me because he never thought I had it in me to fight back, to deceive, to dismantle. He thought I was still the soft one, the trusting one, the girl who looked up to him with wide eyes and an open heart, and I let him believe it because belief is a powerful drug, and he was addicted to control. He started spending more time at the office again. I could tell he sensed a shift, but he didn't know where it was coming from. He tightened budgets, he reviewed emails, he started calling surprise meetings, but I was always one step ahead, because while he was reacting, I was preparing. And then came the moment I had been waiting for, the final key, the thing that would unravel it all. The housing project in Izmir, a coastal development he had pushed forward with minimal oversight because the client was wealthy and impatient and didn't care about process, only deadlines and results. And in his arrogance, Khan had cut corners, permits incomplete, safety reports falsified, subcontractors unpaid, and still he pushed forward, confident that charm and quick fixes would hold it together. But I had copies of everything. I had photos, dates, correspondence. I even had a recording of a phone call where he instructed someone to forge a signature. It wasn't hard. The man was sloppy and used the same phrases over and over, and I recorded everything. I didn't care about ethics anymore, only results. And when I compiled the final report, I didn't send it to the police. I didn't make it public. I sent it to the client, the powerful, impatient, ruthless client who didn't care about justice, only liability and reputation. And what followed was swift, like the snap of a dry branch. The project was halted, the firm was audited, the lawyers came like wolves, and Khan didn't even have time to look for a scapegoat because there was no one left standing beside him. By the time he realized what had happened, I had already resigned quietly without a word. I had already opened my own studio under a new name, already signed with 2 former clients, already moved out of the apartment he helped me lease, already erased him from every part of my life that once bore his fingerprints. And still he didn't know it was me because he couldn't imagine that the silence he had dismissed for so long had teeth, because he couldn't imagine that someone could bleed and still smile and still plan and still build. And as I sat in my new office, first morning sun cutting through the blinds, I looked down at my hands, the same hands that had once reached for his, and realized that what I had built now was mine, truly mine, and no one would ever take it from me again, not through love, not through lies, not through blood. And I finally exhaled, not with Relief not with triumph but with something better, with peace, because I had watched it fall and I had never even raised my voice. They say revenge sets you free, that once the weight is lifted and the debt is paid, you can breathe again, but no one tells you about the silence that follows, the long stretch of emptiness that comes when the storm is over and all that remains is you alone with your thoughts and the ruins of what used to be. I sat in my new studio every morning with the same coffee mug, the same pencil, the same habits, but something fundamental had shifted inside me. I was no longer the woman who built to dream, I was the woman who built to survive, and now that survival was no longer in question, I didn't know what to do with myself anymore. The calls came in, new clients, referrals, old faces returning with cautious admiration, and I smiled. I signed the papers, I delivered the work, I played the part of the woman who had risen from betrayal and made something out of nothing, but inside I felt like a ghost wandering through the frame of a life I barely recognized. I found myself checking his name online more often than I wanted to. I watched the news, I read the articles, I saw the words internal scandal, legal inquiry, firm collapse, and none of it made me feel anything at first, just a dull echo somewhere between satisfaction and nothing at all. Khan had gone silent, disappeared from public view, no statements, no defenses, no denials. It was as if he had swallowed his own name and vanished, and part of me wondered if he knew, if he had pieced it together, if he lay awake at night replaying every step, trying to trace the hand that had slowly pulled the foundation out from under him. And part of me wanted him to know, and part of me didn't, because knowing would give him something, a direction, an enemy, a shape to his defeat, and I didn't want to be a shape in his story. I wanted to be absence. I wanted to be the void, the silence, the nothing that ruined me. Started drawing again, not buildings, not commissions, just lines, empty lines on paper, lines without purpose or end. I filled pages with them, hoping to feel something, to find clarity again, but all I found was the weight of memory and the truth that revenge had not cleansed me, only carved out space for the grief I had postponed. I had not just lost a business, I had lost a version of myself, the girl who believed in collaboration and trust and blood ties, the girl who thought she could build something beautiful with her brother, and now she was gone, replaced by someone sharper, quieter, more deliberate, and I didn't know if I liked her more or less, only that she was here now and she wasn't going anywhere. I received an email one afternoon from a shared client, someone who had worked with Khan and me during our early days before the split. They said they were sorry for what happened, that they hoped I was doing better, that they had always believed the creative brilliance came from me. And I stared at the message for a long time, not knowing how to respond, because what do you say when people only see your worth after it has been stolen and weaponized? I closed the email and didn't reply. I didn't need their apologies, their recognition, their retroactive loyalty. I had learned the hard way that praise after betrayal is just noise, a hollow echo of support too late to matter. I began noticing how quiet everything had become without him. There were no more passive-aggressive messages, no last-minute schedule changes, no mysterious budget adjustments, no tension in the air when I walked into a room, and yet the silence wasn't peace, not yet. It was just the absence of chaos, a thin space where something darker could grow, and I found myself revisiting old drawings from the early days, sketches of our first office, of design ideas we dreamed up together, of rough layouts we laughed over late at night before the world turned, and I wanted to burn them all, but I couldn't, not because they meant something anymore, but because they reminded me of who I was before I stopped believing in shared futures. I kept them in a drawer untouched, a kind of grave for the version of myself that had once thought love was enough. I started walking different routes through the city on purpose, avoiding streets that held ghosts of old meetings, old coffees, old fights. I changed grocery stores, changed playlists, changed the brand of tea I drank, not because any of it mattered, but because I needed to rebuild a life with no traces of him, no fingerprints, no shadows. And still some days I would catch myself almost saying his name out loud, almost reaching for my phone to send him a message out of habit, like a phantom limb twitching where something used to be. And then I would remember, I would breathe, I would let the silence remind me that I had chosen this, that I had cut the cord and set the fire and watched a Bernoni night. I dreamed of him standing in the old studio, the one with the leaky pipes and the crooked window where everything began, and in the dream he was smiling the same smile from the day he told me not to worry, and I felt that same sting of betrayal even in sleep. I woke up sweating, heart racing, and I didn't cry. I just stared at the ceiling until the sun started to rise, and I knew it was time to move again, not physically but internally. To stop surviving and start becoming something new, something clean, something untouchable. I applied for a position at an international design panel, something I had always wanted but never dared to pursue when he was in my orbit, and I was accepted. Without question, I booked a flight to Copenhagen, packed only black clothes, a fresh sketchbook, and the belief that distance might heal what silence had not, and as I stepped onto the plane, I didn't look back. I didn't think of the office I left behind, or the headlines still circulating, or the frozen bank accounts, or the lawsuits crawling behind his name. I just breathed, watched the clouds shift beneath me, and allowed myself the smallest luxury of hope, because revenge had given me justice, but it hadn't given me joy, and now maybe it was time to chase that too, not through someone else, not in the shadow of betrayal, but on my own terms. And for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I smiled, not because I had won, but because I had survived, and now I was free. Copenhagen felt like cold water poured over skin, shocking but clean. The air smelled different, the light hit the buildings in unfamiliar ways, the people walked with a kind of ease I had forgotten was possible, and in those first days I allowed myself to disappear into the rhythm of a place that had no memory of me. I was just another architect, another woman with a sketchbook and tired eyes, and for once that anonymity felt like power. The conference center was a maze of languages and ideas and presentations from people who lived lives untouched by the kind of betrayal I carried like an old scar beneath clean clothes. I listened to them talk about sustainability, about vision, about human-centered design, and I nodded and took notes and pretended that my foundation had not been built on silence and ashes. I stood in front of a panel of strangers and showed them my new project, a redesign of public housing that used space to restore dignity, and they clapped and asked questions, and no one mentioned my last name. No one asked about where I came from or who I used to be, and that too felt like freedom. But even in that freedom, there were moments, small cracks, where the past slipped through, a voice that sounded like his in a hallway, a phrase he used to say in an email, a photo from the Turkish press shared by someone who didn't know me well enough to know the damage they were resurfacing. And each time I smiled, each time I excused myself and walked calmly out of the room, and only later, when I was alone, did I allow myself to feel the burn, the heat rising in my chest, the old version of myself screaming in a voice I had buried. I thought I had ended it, that I had buried the past under enough distance and silence to keep it dead, but some things do not die, they shift, they adapt, they wait. On afternoon, I received a package at the hotel, no return address. Inside was a single folded blueprint paper, smooth, clean, marked with red lines in a style I recognized immediately. It was mine, an old sketch I had started in the early days, something that had never been published, something that had only existed in my private archive, and yet here it was, printed and annotated by a hand I knew too well. The handwriting sharp, slanted, precise, the kind that slices more than it writes. No message, no name, but it didn't need one, and I knew then that the past was not done with me, that I had struck a blow but had not finished the war. I didn't panic. I didn't cry. I folded the paper slowly, placed it in my bag, and went for a walk along the canal, letting the cold wind cut through me, reminding me that I was still here, still alive, still capable of defending what I had built and what I had become. I would not run, I would not hide. I had done that already, and it had almost cost me everything. Instead, I would wait, I would listen, I would prepare, because if Khan had survived, if he had found a way to crawl out of the ruin I left him, and then he would come carefully, he would come quietly, and I knew how to fight that kind of war because I had done it before, and this time I would not wait for him to take the first step. This time I would strike before the blueprint became a blueprint for my own destruction. Days passed in Copenhagen, but time felt both heavy and weightless, like a pendulum swinging between past and present. I spent hours wandering narrow streets, tracing the shapes of buildings and wondering if architecture could ever erase memory if space could hold forgiveness or if it only carried shadows of what was lost. I kept my sketchbook close, filling pages with abstract lines, with concepts that had no clients, no deadlines, no expectations, just pure creation. And sometimes creation felt like healing, but sometimes it felt like digging graves. I met a few people, a woman who spoke of urban regeneration, a man who designed spaces for refugees, both passionate, dedicated, but even their idealism could not drown out the echo of my own story. I found myself avoiding the Turkish community in the city, avoiding invitations, avoiding questions that might lead to explanations, that might lead to unraveling. I did not want to be the woman who had lost everything. I wanted to be the architect of something new, the designer of a life rebuilt from silence and steel. But the past has a way of pulling you back, no matter how far you run, no matter how high you build. And then the emails started arriving, short, cryptic messages sent to my new account, references to meetings I never attended, to deals I never made, to a brother who never stopped watching. And I realized that even in this new chapter, I was still a player in a game. I had not finished, a game where the rules changed but the stakes remained the same. I was both predator and prey, and I had to sharpen my senses if I wanted to survive and win. So I began mapping the connections, tracing lines between people, businesses, shadow accounts, and I saw the faint outline of a network, still active, still dangerous, still waiting for a chance to strike back. And I promised myself that I would not let that happen, that I would be the one holding the blueprint, not the one following it. And as the cold winter crept in, I closed my sketchbook and stared out at the gray skies, thinking of the house by the lake, the office we built, the brother I once trusted. And I smiled with quiet satisfaction, because I was no longer the victim but the architect of my own destiny. The city felt different now, a place not of exile but of opportunity. I had moved past the shadows that haunted my first days in Copenhagen, and now I stood at the edge of something new, invitations to collaborate with firms I once admired, offers to speak at conferences, requests to mentor young architects. People saw me not as the woman who had been betrayed, but as the architect who had survived and rebuilt. And yet, even with all this growth, the past was never far away. I could feel it in the way I hesitated before answering emails, in the quiet moments before sleep, when memories rose unbidden like ghosts of a life I thought I had left behind. I reminded myself that trust was a fragile currency, one easily broken but hard to earn. And I found myself more cautious, more deliberate in the connections I made. I worked harder than ever, drawing blueprints that held meaning, not just for clients but for me, designing spaces that could hold stories and lives, and sometimes pain, but also hope. And I found an unexpected ally in a woman named Elise, a fellow architect from Norway, whose blunt honesty and fierce loyalty reminded me that not everyone was a threat, that some people could become strength in a world built on weakness. And together we began to dream of a project that would not only change a city but change how people lived in it. And as I poured myself into this new vision, I realized that healing was not linear, that progress came with setbacks, and that sometimes the biggest battle was within myself. But I was ready for it. I had to be ready, because the blueprints of my past were still unfolding, and I was determined to draw a future that no one could receive. Momentum I had gained in Copenhagen began to carry me forward like a current. I could no longer resist invitations multiplied from cities I had only dreamed of visiting, offers of collaboration with firms renowned for pushing boundaries and reshaping skylines, and I embraced them all, not out of ambition but out of a desire to reclaim a narrative that had once been stolen from me. Every new blueprint I drew, every project I led, was a statement not just of skill but of survival, a testament to the woman who refused to be erased. And yet, with every success came a shadow, a whisper from the past, reminding me that trust was a double-edged sword, a currency I could not spend recklessly. I found myself guarding my thoughts like precious secrets, sharing pieces of my story only with those who had earned the right to hear them. And even then I held back some truths, because some wounds are too raw to expose even to those closest to you. I spent late nights in my studio, the glow of the city lights filtering through tall windows, casting Long shadows on the walls, the quiet hum of life outside, a stark contrast to the storm that still raged within me. I often found myself staring at the same blueprint over and over, tracing the lines, imagining the spaces filled not just with furniture or light, but with memories, with hopes, with dreams that had once been shattered and were now slowly being put back together piece by piece. I met Elise at a design symposium, a woman whose reputation preceded her, sharp-minded and unyielding. She challenged me, pushed me to think beyond what was comfortable and safe, and in her I found a rare kind of kinship, a partnership forged not in blood but in respect and shared purpose. Together we imagined a project that could transform a forgotten neighborhood, a place where people had lost more than just buildings, where hope had crumbled alongside bricks and mortar, where architecture could be a form of justice, a way to reclaim dignity and identity. And as we worked side by side, I felt a kind of healing taking root, not in grand gestures or declarations, but in the steady accumulation of small victories, the quiet rearrangement of broken pieces until they formed something new and stronger. And yet, even as I built this new life, I could not fully escape the echoes of the past, the occasional unexpected phone call, the shadowy figures I sometimes glimpsed on the periphery of my vision, the vague threats hidden in corporate jargon and legalese, the knowledge that Khan's presence still lingered like a ghost haunting the edges of my world. I did not know what his next move would be, or if he even had one left, but I knew I had to be ready to face it, whatever it was, because I had come too far to fall now. And so I kept building. I kept dreaming, I kept fighting, not just for revenge or justice, but for a future where I could stand without fear, without doubt, without the weight of betrayal on my shoulders. And in that determination I found a fragile kind of peace, a hope that one day the lines I drew would not just be blueprints but bridges to a life truly reclaimed. The weight of my past pressed down on me in ways I never fully understood until I tried to breathe freely without the familiar burden that had shaped my every step. The memories intertwined with every blueprint, every corner I designed, like an invisible thread pulling me back to moments I wished I could erase. And yet those moments defined me. They carved out the space where resilience grew, where determination hardened into steel. And as I walked through the streets of Copenhagen, each step echoed with the ghosts of what had been lost and what might never be recovered. The city itself became a mirror reflecting not just my ambition but my fears, my hopes, and the quiet desperation that lurked beneath my calm exterior. I found solace in long nights spent drafting designs that were more than just buildings but manifestations of my desire to create something lasting, something meaningful, something that could stand tall even when everything else around it crumbled. And yet no matter how far I pushed myself, no matter how many accolades I earned, no matter how many new projects I signed, the shadows of my past crept in like unwelcome guests, uninvited and persistent, reminding me that no victory was complete, no wound fully healed. And in those moments of quiet vulnerability, I questioned everything: who I was, what I wanted, and if the cost of success was worth the price I had paid. I thought about Khan, about the lies, the betrayals, the quiet theft of a future we had once dreamed of together, and I realized that while I had taken back what was mine, I had also lost a part of myself, a part that may never return. And yet in that loss I found a strange kind of freedom, a freedom to rebuild not just the world around me but the woman within. And so I pushed forward, embracing the uncertainty, the pain, and the promise of something new, knowing that the journey ahead was long and winding, but it was mine to walk, and I was no longer afraid. The mornings began with a heaviness that no cup of coffee could chase away. The memories surfaced with the light creeping into the corners of my mind where I thought they had been safely tucked away. But grief is a shape-shifting visitor, arriving unannounced, demanding attention. And even as I continued to build my career, my designs gaining recognition, my name whispered in circles I once thought unreachable, I wrestled with the idea of identity, not as a fixed point but as a shifting landscape shaped by loss and perseverance, the blueprint of my life redrawn with every decision, every compromise, every victory, and every scar I carried beneath the surface like a secret tattoo, only visible in moments of solitude in the studio where the noise of the world faded into the background, and it was just me and the quiet hum of the drafting table and the endless possibilities waiting to be born. I reflected on how betrayal had rewritten the rules of my existence, how the lines I had once drawn with hope now carried the weight of survival, and how the woman I was becoming was forged in fire tempered by heartbreak. And yet there was beauty in that transformation, a fierce grace that came from owning every fractured piece of myself without apology or regret. I found myself pushing boundaries in my work, daring to design spaces that challenged norms, that gave voice to the unheard and shelter to the forgotten. And in those designs, I poured my story not as a victim but as a warrior, as an architect of change. And as the accolades grew, so did the loneliness, the quiet hours spent drafting concepts that would never see the light of day, the friendships left behind for fear of vulnerability, the moments when I questioned whether the price of this solitude was too high. And in those moments, I remembered the first time I stood face to face with the ruin of trust, the slow collapse of family, and how from those ashes I had risen, not by forgetting but by embracing the pain, by transforming it into a force that propelled me forward. And yet the past was never far. It lurked in the shadows of my dreams, in the letters I never sent, in the spaces between my breaths, reminding me that healing was not linear, that some wounds would always bleed beneath the surface, and that to live fully was to accept both the light and the darkness within. And as I stared out at the city skyline, the sun setting behind towering glass and steel monuments, I realized that this journey was far from over, that the blueprints I held were not just plans for buildings but maps for my own salvation, and I was ready to walk that path no matter where it led, because for the first time I was no longer afraid of the future or the ghosts that walked beside me. The city lights flickered like distant stars in the twilight as I stood by the window of my studio, watching the world move without me. For a moment, the chaos of the past seemed to dissolve into the soft hum of the night, and yet beneath the surface there was a tension, a tightening of the threads that held my carefully constructed life together. I felt it in the way emails arrived with subtle threats hidden between lines, calls from unknown numbers that went unanswered, footsteps behind me in crowded streets, the unshakable feeling of being watched. And I knew that Khan was not finished, that the war we had started was far from over. And in that knowledge I found both fear and resolve, because fear was a reminder of what was at stake, and resolve was the fuel that pushed me forward. I thought about the moments when I had nearly given up, when the weight of betrayal had threatened to crush me, but I had risen each time, stronger, more determined, more silent. And as the days blurred into nights, I poured myself into work, each blueprint a silent declaration, each completed project a fortress against the shadows that sought to reclaim me. But even as I built walls around myself, I realized that true freedom was not in isolation, but in facing the darkness head on, embracing the wounds and refusing to be defined by them. I began to see the cracks, not just in the buildings I designed, but in the facades people wore, in the lives they led behind closed doors. And I understood that my story was not unique, that betrayal and loss were threads woven into the fabric of many lives. And in that understanding, I found a strange kind of kinship, a desire to use my voice not just to rebuild spaces but to rebuild hope and connection. And as winter crept in, bringing with it long cold nights, I stood ready for whatever came next, knowing that I was no longer the girl who had been betrayed, but the woman who would never be broken. The weight of impending confrontation settled over me like a storm ready to break the air, thick with anticipation. Every shadow seemed to whisper secrets of battles yet to come, and though the past had tried to claim me, I stood unyielding, fortified by lessons carved in pain and perseverance. The studio became my sanctuary and my battlefield, a place where designs transcended form and function, becoming blueprints of resilience and defiance. I found solace in the silence between each line drawn and the methodical repetition of drafting, that quiet focus, a balm to the chaos that threatened to engulf me. But even as I lost myself in creation, I could not ignore the signs, the subtle tremors beneath the surface, the way familiar names appeared in unexpected places, the coded messages hidden in contracts, the distant calls that echoed through my thoughts like ghosts haunting the edges of my mind. Khan's presence was a shadow stretching across borders, of force not easily vanquished, and I knew that to win this war I had to be smarter, Faster, more ruthless than ever before. I sharpened my instincts like a blade, honed my strategies with relentless precision, and surrounded myself with allies who understood that survival was not just about strength but about wisdom and timing. I grappled with the paradox of revenge and forgiveness, recognizing that to be whole, I had to confront the darkness without letting it consume me, and in that struggle I discovered a power deeper than vengeance, a light born of acceptance, and the fierce determination to reclaim not just what was taken but who I truly was. As dawn broke over the city, casting long shadows and new light across familiar streets, I stepped forward, ready to face whatever awaited, knowing that this was more than a fight for justice. It was a fight for freedom, for identity, and for the right to write my own story without fear or regret. The city stretched beneath me like a canvas waiting to be painted, the night air cool and crisp, carrying the scent of rain and renewal. I stood at the edge of everything I had built and everything I had lost, the years of silence, betrayal, resilience, and quiet victory weaving together into a tapestry that was uniquely mine. The blueprints I held were no longer just lines on paper but stories of survival, maps of pain and hope intertwined, and as I prepared to face the final chapter of this journey, I felt a calm unlike any I had known before. The weight of the past no longer pressed on my shoulders. Instead, it rested gently like a familiar melody, one I could listen to without flinching, without fear, without regret. I remembered the days when I was naive enough to believe that family meant unconditional trust, when I thought blood ties were bonds stronger than any contract or betrayal, and I mourned the loss of that innocence. But I also celebrated the woman I had become, the architect, not just of buildings but of my own destiny. And as dawn broke, I stepped into the studio where it all began, the space filled with memories, ghosts of laughter and shadows of lies, and I let the silence fill me, a silence that was not empty but full of promise, of possibilities, of new beginnings. And I reached for the phone that would send the documents that would finally sever the last ties that bound me to the past, a final report detailing every fraud, every lie, every secret kept hidden behind smiles and handshakes, a document not meant to destroy but to expose, to heal, to bring justice. In my heart knew that this was not revenge but closure, and in that closure there was freedom, the freedom to move forward unburdened, unafraid. And as the sun rose higher, casting golden light through the windows, I smiled, truly smiled for the first time in years, because I was free, truly free, and the future was mine to design. The days that followed were a blur of quiet determination and relentless focus as I moved through each task with a purpose that no longer wavered. The final report was more than just a document, it was the culmination of years of pain, betrayal, and unyielding resolve, every line a testament to the truth I refused to let be buried beneath lies and silence. I gathered evidence, meticulously compiling records, photographs, emails, and statements, each piece fitting into the puzzle of deceit that had threatened to consume not just my career but my very sense of self. And as I prepared to send the report to the authorities and the clients I had built new relationships with, I felt a surge of empowerment unlike anything I had known before. It was not hatred that fueled me but clarity, a vision for a future unchained from the shadows of the past. And yet amidst this clarity there was vulnerability, a fragile thread reminding me that while I could control the narrative, I could not erase the scars, the wounds hidden beneath layers of strength and success. And in those moments of solitude, I allowed myself to feel the full weight of all I had endured, the nights spent questioning my worth, the mornings waking to the ache of loneliness, the quiet tears shed when no one was watching. And it was in that rawness that I found true strength, a strength born not from revenge but from acceptance, from the willingness to embrace all parts of myself, the broken and the whole, the betrayed and the brave. And as the report was sent and the wheels of justice began to turn, I stepped back into the world with a sense of peace that had once seemed impossible, the city no longer a place of ghosts but a canvas for new stories, new beginnings. And as I walked through streets bathed in sunlight, the future stretched before me, vast and inviting. I realized that this was not an end but a beginning, the blueprint for the life I would now create, with hands steady, heart open, and spirit unbroken. And in that realization, I smiled, knowing that no matter what came next, I was ready, I was free, and I was finally home. Thanks for listening to my story with me. Don't forget to follow and subscribe for more stories.